Welcome to Practicing with Purpose. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today we're going to be chatting with Kevin Sullivan about protecting your passion with good public relations. So this is something I can't wait to hear about. So welcome, Kevin. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And for those who don't know Kevin, here's a little bit about him. He built a marketing department at an AmLaw 200 law firm, where he also managed an extensive media relations program that involved several outside PR firms. And he helped to grow them from about 100 attorneys to over 400 as they received national and global media coverage. And Kevin's also steered a team that developed an app helping employers comply with Family and Medical Leave Act. So clearly a pretty versatile guy. And he's passionate about helping organizations protect their brands and expand on their reputations. And that's something that we could all use as attorneys. So Kevin, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what made you pursue a career in marketing?
Well, I got into marketing kind of almost by accident. I was a journalist. I went to the University of Missouri and got my journalism degree and worked in television for about 15 years. I started out as a reporter and an anchor and then went into management. And after 15 years in television, I really wanted to do something different. And I started looking into marketing and public relations because I thought that even though I didn't have the supposed training in those fields, I thought my background lended well to it. One thing led to another, and I landed a job as marketing director at a small software company. And we grew rapidly, and we did most of it through public relations. And then I ended up moving around a little bit and ended up in Atlanta, where I was doing public relations for a PR firm. And one of the clients I brought in was a large law firm, and large at the time was just over 100 attorneys.
Yeah.
And I loved working with them because they're smart and it's fun to work with smart people.
Yeah.
Eventually, after 5 years of them being my client, they asked me to come in and start a marketing department for them. So even though I counseled with a couple other law firms, that was my first venture inside the law firm where I actually did everything. And initially it was just me doing everything until we grew a team of about 25 people by the time.
Wow, that's pretty significant marketing department for a firm. And it's funny, in Canada, for until relatively recent history, we weren't allowed to advertise as lawyers. So it's still this whole idea about marketing as law firms in the history of the practice is still pretty new, I would say. So,
well, in the United States, they had the same issue. They weren't allowed to advertise. And that ended, I think it was around 1980. But now, even though they advertise, the various bar associations, every state bar association has its own rules for ethics, which includes advertising. Most of them follow the guidance from the American Bar Association, but some of them are more stringent than others. And some have, quite frankly, very bizarre rules that hamper lawyers in being able to tell their stories the way they want to tell them.
Yeah, the joys of our governing legal bodies. It can be a minefield to navigate sometimes, but I can totally see that transition now from sort of as a journalist and TV into marketing. That makes perfect sense to me. And some of the clients I represent, I've done social justice and labor law for over 30 years and did a lot of work representing, sort of the media guild and various media related unions here in Canada. So that explains how you got into PR for law firms. And I'd love you to tell us a little bit about why would a law firm want to have whether a PR team or at least be aware or elevate their interest about public relations and media. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, if you want to be somewhat mercenary about it from a law firm perspective, it's one of the most economical ways to raise your profile. Public relations does not cost anywhere near what an advertising campaign costs. Yeah. I mean, they're not cheap if it's done correctly, but it is nowhere near the expense that you get with advertising. And lawyers, I mean, think about it. They want to be known as the smartest, the best, the one who knows how to solve the problem. And what better way to do it than through public relations? And you get mentioned in the media, on the web. There's all sorts of avenues now in which you can be exposed as somebody who knows the answers to certain problems. I mean, that is ideal for their profession.
So why don't we take a step back for a bit, just for our listeners out there who don't know, when you talk about the difference of PR, public relations versus advertising, I think probably a lot of them out there wouldn't necessarily even know what the distinction is. So dig in a little bit for that on us, if you will.
Well, that might be true for some of the folks that are a little longer in the tooth,
Yeah.
but I think some of the younger lawyers
Yeah.
definitely get the differentiation, and a lot of them are doing their own work anyway. And that's a whole other thing about how they do their practice. But, public relations is you go out and position yourself as somebody or a firm that has the expertise, the knowledge, the experience in a specific area. And so that the wise choice is to hire them to take care of your problem. It's kind of like you want to be kind of the IBM of the days of yore, when the old saying was nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. Nowadays, you say that to some people and they go, IBM, what is that?
Yeah.
But I think you and I and a lot of your audience probably understand that. They've heard that saying before.
Yeah.
But you want to be seen as the person that you hire because that's the person that's going to solve the problem. And you're not taking a big risk by hiring this individual. And one way to get that brand recognition is you are seen as credible if you're interviewed in traditional media, whether it be print, radio, TV, or if you're seen on blogs or heard in podcasts or other some of the newer platforms that are available to raise your profile.
Yeah.
So the more people see you, the more they realize, wow, this person must really know what they're talking about, because I read about them in the newspaper and then I saw her on a blog post, et cetera, et cetera. And over time, you grow your reputation. And I mean, that leads to, what should a law firm or a lawyer do if they're starting out or they want to dip their toe into marketing? I would say the smartest way to do it is start out with PR.
Yeah.
And you can do a lot of it yourself, but if you're a busy lawyer, it's hard to, make those calls to reporters and do those things. So you might want to get some professional help.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was going to be my next question is how can, obviously having a professional, it's going to elevate your ability to go further faster, but how do you start making that connections to be the people that are getting quoted in the newspaper or getting that recognition in the paper for the things that you're achieving?
Well, you have to pay attention to what's going on in the media, and either you do it yourself or you get somebody to do it. And then when you see things that relate to what you do, you can reach out to the reporters or the bloggers or whoever has covered that topic and let them know, hey, I have expertise in this area. And if you're ever talking about this again, I'd like to talk to you, or at least be considered for it. Or you can give them a little tidbit, say, hey, here's something you didn't think about in your last report. Maybe you should include this. And so you kind of have to reach out, because the reporters aren't going to come to you. If they don't know you, they're not coming to you.
Yeah.
Now, if you have the benefit of being at a larger law firm where the firm is known by certain media, you might by default be interviewed by the media because they contact the firm, and somebody at the firm, probably a PR person or a marketing person, says, oh, well, we have this attorney who's an expert on that, talk to them. But that's almost like a one-off. Yeah. But in order to make it happen, you have to reach out and be available and, give away free things. You want to give away information and knowledge so that people know, oh, he really does know what he's talking about. Yeah. And then they come back to you because you've given them something for free.
Yeah. Beautiful. And speaking of stuff for free, what are your thoughts on from a PR perspective? Like you've mentioned about blog posts and podcasts, how much value is there in that for lawyers to be doing that if they can get to their target market? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of value in it. The trick is doing it right and doing it consistently. And that's where just about everybody fails, because people don't realize, they say, oh, blog, that sounds easy. I can sit down and I can, I have this I'm just this font of knowledge and I can type down all this stuff, but the day-to-day doing it suddenly gets in the way of other stuff that makes money. And we all know that, the billable hour is still sacred within law firms. I mean, that's changing to some degree with, alternative fee arrangements and such. But, if it gets in the way of you making money, it's hard to justify doing it. And that's kind of short-sighted, because marketing should not be seen as an expense. It should be seen as an investment in your future and an investment in what you're producing. Because if you don't tell people about yourself, referrals go a long way, especially in law firms. We all know that. Yeah. But if you really want to stand out, you want to be stellar, you've got to be doing these things. Yeah. And, getting a blog to be recognized takes a while. One, you have to talk about things that are germane to whatever the area is that
Sure.
you're an expert in. And you have to do it consistently because, all the search engines out there and the bots and everything, if you're not out there a lot and other people are seeing you, you are wasting your time. You have to do it consistently.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when you say about the billable hours on two fronts. One, I think we are finally seeing a shift because it's one of the number one complaints about lawyers who are leaving the profession in droves. They hate that docketing system, right? The pressure around it. So I think we are seeing a shift away from that. But also it's about prioritizing, because I don't know what your thoughts are, Kevin. I'd love to hear. I find the lawyers who are so focused on everything just going into those billable hours, I think are going to go the way of the dodo bird. It's people who make the time for the marketing, make the time for the PR, make the time for thinking outside the box. Those are the ones who are going to survive and thrive in this sort of new world we find ourselves in. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's very accurate because, it goes back to, I remember talking to attorneys at law firms and they would suddenly want to do marketing. And I'd be, wow, all of a sudden you're like all gung ho. And their response would be, well, I'm not busy right now. So they had their priorities a little mixed up. Yeah. When they were really busy and all their hours were taken up with billable time, they were doing no marketing.
Yeah.
And that's when they should have been doing their marketing.
Yes.
Now, when they're not busy and they're not billing and they want to market, they're already behind.
Yeah.
Because marketing takes time. You don't just decide one day, I'm going to write a brilliant blog post and let this business come to me, or I'm going to go on LinkedIn and say hi to 4 people and they're all going to send me matters. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so when you're busy, that's when you really should be promoting yourself. And, you got to be tricky about, you certainly don't want to talk about current matters. You don't want to talk about anything that a client would be, unhappy about you talking about.
Yeah.
But, just because you're busy with client matters doesn't mean you let the marketing go away.
Yeah.
Because once you realize, oh, I've got to do marketing now, you're already too late.
Yeah. And frankly, you can get interns or students. There's any number of ways you can get people to help with some of that blogging stuff if you're willing to make it a priority as well, I would
think. Well, that brings up a really good question about, blogging and social media and who should do what. And, there's one camp, and I kind of fall into this camp, to be honest, that thinks that the only way your social media comes across as authentic is if you do it yourself.
Okay. Good.
Now, if you have, say, an intern or a trusted associate or a trusted assistant who kind of knows your voice and can write a first draft for you, maybe that's okay, but you still have to get on there and touch it and make it yours. But if you're relying on other people to do stuff as you,
yeah,
I think it comes through as inauthentic. And I think people see through that. And I do know that there are solutions out there offered to lawyers that will make social media posting, especially on Twitter and LinkedIn, almost automatic. And I'm not going to go into the machinations of how they make that happen. But I personally, when I was at the law firm and lawyers asked me about that, I personally told them, I don't think you should do it.
Yeah.
And yes, we could. Our firm could have afforded it. Absolutely, we could have afforded it. We're an AmLaw 200 firm. We had plenty of money.
Sure. And
we spent a lot of money on marketing, but we didn't spend money in that area. And because I believed, and I was able to convince a lot of people in the firm, likewise, that the only way social media works is if you're truly doing it yourself and it's authentic. Well, then you're having a conversation. If you're not having a conversation, what's the point? You're just throwing your name out there.
Yeah.
And having somebody else do it for you does not generate a conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you speak to those automated messages, because I've got those, loads of those, and you immediately know. I mean, you immediately know, not only are they not authentic and individualized or personalized or a conversation, half of them you have the pretty distinct sense that they're not even being done locally, that they're being done offshore, right? Which is actually can be counterproductive. So I know within our firm, what we do often is I'll have maybe an intern or a student drig up, here are some current issues recently, or how about these cases, and propose the ideas, propose sort of do a little bit of work on it. And then, either myself or one of the partners will sort of personalize that message by actually writing the post itself. Now you talk, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I know you have another question, but I just want to comment on what you just said. I mean, basically what you're doing is you're having somebody help you with issue spotting. And that I think is very valuable.
Yeah.
Especially you have somebody who understands what your practice is, and they can look out there on the landscape for you and spot issues that you should address. I think that's a great way to have other people assist you.
Okay, good to know. And when you talk about news, the term you keep hearing everybody throw around it now is newsjacking, where when we're talking about those issues, where if there's a current issue that's hot, finding a way to get a social media post or even a tweet or something on that relates to your practice or gets some attention somehow on it. Is that a practice you ever used, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, we used it all the time. And I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah.
Why not foist yourself into the conversation if you can, if you have something to add? Now, if you're on there and just because you're trying to grandstand, but you really don't have anything to contribute, people will spot that. But
Sure.
when you have something to contribute, you have true expertise and you are willing to take a stand and have an opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely fine to do it. And we did it all the time. And I will say, to great success. And one of the things that would happen, and this is part of just being diligent and being, issue spotting and being aggressive and responding to things that are out there, is that sometimes we would get quoted in a media outlet that had never heard of us and never ever thought about us. And after that, suddenly we would get contacted by that media outlet. And so it opens doors.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. I love that. And I've heard of a lot of firms who just had just hits galore from just something as simple as a tweet on a subject that happened to be hot, and they had a clever approach on it in that moment and really got a lot of attention and notice. Now, when you talked, Kevin, you had mentioned about a brand before. And again, I think everybody talks about branding. I think a lot of people misunderstand the concept. Everybody just focuses on colors and fonts or whatever. And I know your bio talks a lot about the importance of protecting a brand. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What does that mean for you, and what should we be taking away from it?
Well, the brand is everything that people think about your organization. Yeah. It's not just the logo and the color and the font and all that, like you mentioned. It is when you think about an organization, what do you think? I mean, here are a couple good examples. Disney. What do you think about when you hear Disney? Yeah. Well, everybody thinks fun, a great place to go, families love it. Everybody has a certain image of Disney. And then there are hotel chains that have certain images, like say the Four Seasons or some of those other high-end hotels. Somebody mentions that hotel, you immediately have an image in your brain what that place is like, even though you've never been there. Yeah. And law firms are the same way. You hear a law firm name, people immediately have a thought about it. I mean, there are some of the silk stocking firms up in the Northeast. As soon as you hear them, you go, oh, well, those guys are great. And you assume their rates are really high. But the good thing about that, because they have that brand recognition, they can charge those high rates and get paid them.
Yeah.
If people don't know who you are, you can't demand those high rates.
Yeah.
And that's the whole, branding is so important to law firms, because you want people to, even if they've never encountered you, you want them to go, oh, I've heard of them. Even if they haven't heard that much about you, but somewhere they've heard about you, then they know, oh, those are good lawyers. Yeah. And then people feel comfortable about hiring you. And it's like, and then the prospect says, well, gosh, your rates are so high. And they go, well, my rates are high because of my track record. Yeah. And, if you don't want to pay it, you can go somewhere else. And that's a whole other issue, because I think too many times lawyers cave on rates when they should stand firm. Yeah. And I've seen that many, many times. I think a lot of times if you just stand firm, people are going to pay it.
Yeah, especially I think new lawyers or lawyers in it, smaller for boutique firms tend to be more likely to do that. So yeah, I love that. Now, I know you've had a lot of experience helping law firms in sort of crisis situations as well. So tell us, what do you do for those clients? How do you help them?
Well, that every crisis is unique, and they're highly emotional, and the people involved in it aren't the best ones to be making decisions during the time of a crisis. I think that's when you need some outside help, because people who are not emotionally invested. And so you need to come in to a situation like that, and you can be the level-headed one, emotion aside, and evaluate, here's the bad thing that's happening. How do we maneuver through it to try to get to a good spot at the end? Yeah. And you have to go in and just tell people, look, you're going to listen to me, and you're going to hear some things you don't necessarily agree with, but you've got to work with me on this.
Yeah.
because if you want to come out of this on the good end, listen. And that's sometimes hard for lawyers because I don't mean this as a bash against every lawyer out there, but every lawyer I've ever met always thought they were the smartest person in the room,
Yeah.
no matter who was in the room.
Yeah.
And so you always have that you have to overcome.
Yeah.
But having been involved in crises for law firms, the good thing has been that there's been somebody, say the chairman or somebody in the firm, who really does see the big picture and understands branding and understands why a crisis is such a threat, will say, we're going to listen to the outside advice because they don't have a dog in this fight and they know what needs to be done. And you need somebody like that internally that will make sure you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a reputation for listening so well, although I'm happy to say, one of the things that prompted me to start practicing on purpose is to get away from some of those more traditional, competitive, elitist kind of approaches to the practice of law and come with more collaborative, sort of purpose-based approach. So I love that. And just before we move off branding, what are your thoughts? Because I've heard some people say, and I know we did it in our firm, like try and be really intentional about how you want people to see you. Choose 3 words that would be words that would really identify with the reputation that you want to have. When people think of, Watson labor law, they think of passion, they think of drive, they think whatever. Is that a valuable exercise, do you think, for lawyers? Would you recommend they do that?
When you do stuff like that inside a law firm, you get really interesting mixed reactions, because years ago, when I was at this one firm, we went through a whole branding exercise where we were trying to figure out, what are we? What do we stand for? And we went through that whole process. And of course, some of the lawyers, and it was a small number of lawyers out of the 200 at the firm at the time. It was maybe half a dozen lawyers and some marketing people and an outside consultant that, locked ourselves in a room for a day and talked about, who are we? What are we? What do we tell people? What do we want people to recognize us for? And we did some of those exercises, such as, if the firm were a car, what car would it be? Now, when we started that, a lot of the lawyers were like, have you completely lost your mind? And they were just like, what? And they just didn't get it. But then as we did it more and more, then they started getting into it. But then, a light bulb went off. They went, oh, it's not about a car, or it's not about a tree. It's about who we are and how do we want to very quickly tell somebody. It comes down to the, especially in the tech world, people talk about their elevator pitches. What is the elevator pitch? When you have 30 seconds or a minute to tell somebody about you and the firm, what are you going to tell them? Because you want them to understand who you are, and you don't have very much time.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, you don't have very much time anyway. Everybody's attention spans are so short, and everybody's on little screens that, you've got, your message has got to be succinct and it's got to hit right away.
Yeah, that's a great test, Kevin. And I want to just put a pin in that for our listeners. I invite you all, I challenge all of you to do that, because I don't think we do that as lawyers very often. What would your elevator pitch be that in 30 seconds would totally capture the essence of your firm? Not just what you do in terms of practice area, but the essence of your firm and who you are and what you stand for. And Kevin, I can see how effective marketing could help lawyers attract their ideal clients. And I'd love you to talk about how that could help them practice with more purpose. First, do you think that's accurate, that it can help you really target those ideal clients rather than just trying to appeal to everybody? And how could that help us practice with more purpose?
Well, I think the most successful lawyers are the ones who really zero in on a certain area. And, let's use labor and employment as an example. So under the umbrella of labor and employment, you say, I'm a labor and employment attorney. Well, to a layman, that might sound pretty narrow, but really under labor and employment, there's a whole bunch of stuff that falls under there. And you can't be the expert in every single one of those areas. So you have to decide, what am I the expert at? Am I an OSHA expert?
Yeah.
Am I a wage hour expert?
Yeah.
What is my area of expertise? And then you have to just focus on that, because people then want to hire, I want to hire the person. That's all they do.
Yeah.
That's all you do is OSHA matters. Oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm having OSHA issues. You're the guy or the gal. And so, that's boiling it down to the bare bones and maybe oversimplifying it, but that's the way I view it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's super important because I think the temptation is the opposite. I think so many law firms, and I was going to say especially startups, but I think across the board, it's all about they're thinking volume. We want more, more, more. We're going to grab everything. And thinking that that's the way to protect themselves to make more money, when in fact, the opposite is true. The more you get known as being an absolute expert in a particular area, and you pick an area that you love, that you're passionate about, not only can you do what you love and love what you do, but you're going to attract more clients and you can attract a higher price point. What are your thoughts on that?
As you were talking about that, it made me think of a story of something that happened several years ago when I was at this law firm. And it was a labor and employment firm. And we had recently brought in a new partner who was a very well-known attorney in the labor and employment world in a specific area of practice. And he was well known in government and he had held very high positions in Washington, D.C. He's a known entity. Well, it'd been a long time since he'd been in a law firm, but he got an RFP. And for anybody who's listening to this, who's ever had an RFP, I'm sure you hate them as much as I do. But he got an RFP from a very large international organization that wanted work in a very specific area of labor and employment law. And it had to do with union avoidance and managing union shops.
Yikes.
And that was it. And so the RFP, which was worth a lot of money because this was a very big organization with outlets all over the world. So the RFP was very specific to that. Well, he got it because of his connections in DC. He knew somebody high up in this organization and they knew he had come to our firm. So they routed it to him. Ideal. That's exactly what you want.
Yeah.
So he had asked me to help with the response and I put together a little team and we got together and we said, okay, they want this very specific area. And I said, luckily our firm is really strong in that area and we have all sorts of information we can give them. So we did all that. And then he says, now we have to do pages on every single area in which we practice and include that in the response. And I said to him, no, they didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
And if you send that to them, you're probably going to irritate them because then they'll think they have to read it and you're going to send them this book and they're going to go, hey, I asked for a chapter. I didn't ask for the entire Bible. And so he got angry and he insisted that we do it his way. So I said, okay, in front of the team, I said, I just want to go on the record to tell you that if we do it your way, we're not going to get the business. But we're going to do it your way because you're insisting. We did it his way. We never heard anything from him.
Oh, wow.
His contact, who had purposely sent him the RFP, didn't even respond to him.
Wow.
So I guess in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is, you've got to be really focused on what you're doing. And if somebody asks you for something, if they ask for, something that's red, give them something red. Don't give them something red, purple, green, and all these other colors. Only give them what they want.
Yeah. And it's also waters down. I mean, the point was they're hiring you for this specific focus. And rather than just show them your expertise in that, the more you add about everything else you do, the more they start questioning how highly, expert you could be in that one area that they're most interested in.
Exactly. But I did tell him, I said, if we get this business, I go, this is going to be worth a lot of money. And we're in at the highest levels at this organization.
Yeah.
If we get this business and we go in and do a good job, guess what? Then we can tell them about these other things.
Absolutely.
And at that point, then they're going to be comfortable and say, well, they did a really good job over here. Maybe they have the people over there that can do this other thing for us.
Yeah.
And I said, but let's get the one thing first that they've asked.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Your story gave a little stab in my heart because I'm at the other end of the spectrum. We specialize exclusively in trade union law and have definitely experienced being at the receiving end or the defending end where it's clear that those RFPs had gone out on the other side. So I could totally relate to that story. So I'd love if you could share with us what other ways do you think marketing can help lawyers practice more on purpose? Like we talked about that marketing can help you attract that ideal client so that you can get clients that you love working with. What are some other ways that you think marketing can maybe help lawyers practice more on purpose?
Well, they can get involved in their community. And I don't mean just their professional community. I mean their community. And do it in a meaningful way. Now, I've always been a big believer in people doing pro bono or doing things where they're somewhat visible in the community, but I also think it needs to have some kind of relation to what they practice.
Smart.
So, you don't want to be doing some charity work that has absolutely nothing to do with what you practice. And that may sound too mercenary to some people,
Well,
but I think you should, if you really genuinely love the area of law that you practice, why wouldn't you love
yeah,
areas within the law where you can give your time and your expertise at no charge to help people?
it's great advice.
Why can't you marry those two things together? And then when you are in the community and people are seeing you and see how genuine you are, they go, well, this person really does care.
Yeah.
And you can do that. You can get involved in industries too. That's a little more mercenary, but you can volunteer to be on committees or boards or whatever in the particular industry in which you work. But don't just be there and don't just show up for the rubber chicken lunches.
Yeah.
Do stuff.
Yeah.
Contribute to that organization in a meaningful way so that they can say to their members, he or she is one of us.
That's great advice. And as you say, why not target it to create those synergies in an area that you love in any event? So, yeah. And I'd love to hear, Kevin, how do you define success? Because one of the things I'm passionate about is sort of reframing how we show up and practice law, how we define success in the practice. So how do you define success?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're doing, I guess, and sort of depends on who you're doing it for. What do they consider success?
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't matter what you think, it's what they think.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody says, I really, really need to get into something like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, some really high target.
Sure.
And you get them in there. Well, that's a success. Did it get them business? Probably not day one, but down the road, maybe it does.
Yeah.
And part of success, let's say from a PR perspective, is continued mentions. PR isn't a one-shot deal. Just because you land, say, even on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, it's not like, oh, I was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
I'm done.
I'm done. And now I'm going to sit back and reap millions of dollars because everybody is going to be beating down my door. Well, that's not the case. Good PR is a constant drumbeat. You just have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And that's true of, I think, all marketing. And so much of what we call marketing today is in many respects what we used to call public relations.
Yeah.
Blogging, podcasts, all this stuff that's on the internet, nowadays with so much news being generated by non-news organizations, or not generated, but coming from what are not traditionally considered news organizations.
Yeah.
All of that really kind of falls under PR. Because a lot of that, the only expense you have is kind of your time and maybe anybody you've hired to assist you, but you don't have you're not making a direct purchase.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're definitely starting to see law firms, which is relatively new, I think, for law firms jumping in, but whether it's Insta or Twitter or TikTok, even some of these new platforms as well, to build that brand and show their personality in a different way. So now, what are some of the biggest fears that you find that you face when you're dealing with lawyers in this issue, in particular around sort of marketing and PR, and how do you address them to help move forward?
Well, that's changed over time. When I first got into law firm marketing, one of the biggest things I ran into as a resistance was lawyers who were opposed to doing public relations. They had this mindset that the media were somehow evil and didn't understand what they did, and nobody could understand what they did. And so they looked at media as anathema, and that, nobody could tell their story. And so that took a long time to overcome that. Now, I think people are well beyond that.
Yeah.
And anybody who thinks that way now, it's kind of like, is it even worth the effort to try to convince them otherwise? Probably not. But, the younger lawyers coming out of law school now, they've grown up in a whole different world. They don't even, a lot of them don't even want assistance. They do all their own work.
Yeah.
They don't need assistance. They write their own briefs. They don't dictate them and then give somebody a tape, and that what is a woefully inefficient way that law firms work forever. And nobody else operates that way. They just don't. But I'm kind of wandering off from what you asked, I think. But.
No, I actually love that because, but as you were saying that, being ruthlessly honest, I think part of it, and I think it is changing, but the whole law school experience in some ways used to, I think, indoctrinate us to be above the fray. We were somehow above it. And I could see why, you'd have that resistance that doing PR, and God forbid something like Instagram or whatever, is somehow beneath us. So I totally see that shift that we're experiencing now.
And that applies to advertising too, because once I got lawyers comfortable with the whole PR thing and they started seeing that there was value in it, because one, it was an ego thing. They loved reading their name in the newspaper. And then when they got a TV interview, they wanted to make sure I got copies of that tape for them. So, but then when we started doing advertising, that was a whole other ball of wax. And, when I did my first real ad campaign for a law firm, was around 2006. And it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of resistance within the firm to do it. And there were some people that thought we weren't being aggressive enough, which was great. Those were my friends.
Yeah.
Within the firm, but they were kind of the minority at the time. But over time, people started to see, there is the trick about, I was often asked, well, how many matters can you point to for that ad that we ran in the National Law Journal? Well, we couldn't point at any. And part of that was our own internal problems, because people just didn't report where the real referral source was.
Yeah.
If somebody said, oh, I saw your ad, it might not necessarily make it into our system.
Yeah.
But, I would try to tell them, say, well, people see it and people talk about it.
Yeah.
Or at least if they think about it, I go, don't you want to, when you're going to try to get a new piece of business and you walk in to a room full of people you don't really know, wouldn't you rather them at least have some inkling of who you are because they saw an ad or saw an article and they're like, you're not a complete unknown. You might not be top of mind, but they're like, oh yeah, I do know something about this guy.
Yeah.
And they may not know a thing about you, but they've seen your name.
Absolutely.
They've seen the firm's name.
Yeah.
And so they're more comfortable with you and they're going to be more open to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's undervalued, because some of these are tough to track because it's unconscious, right? It's that multiple touch points and they may not even know where they saw it, but there's that instant credibility that they feel because they recognize the name or the brand. So I totally get that. So share with us, Kevin, what's something you know now that you wish you knew when you first started?
Well, something that I wish I knew then that I know now. When I first started working in a law firm, I wish I understood better how a law firm is actually structured and how the internal politics work. Because when I was on the outside giving advice to law firms, I wasn't involved in the internal politics or the machinations that went on inside a law firm. And so everything seemed hunky-dory to me. And, I loved working with all these smart people. Then once I was inside a law firm, it was shocking to me, quite frankly, at the politics. And I'd been involved in corporate politics before, but nothing like what I experienced in a law firm. And it was mind-boggling to me. And I saw a lot of the actions and the behaviors I saw them as counterproductive.
Yes.
And I was like, why do they put up with this?
Yeah.
And I was like, any other organization would put an end to this type of behavior by certain people. Yeah. But, it all came down to, if you brought in a lot of money, you kind of got away with whatever you wanted to get away with. And I just thought that, and it was shocking to me. And I wish I'd known that before I went in. I would have avoided a couple of mistakes, because I probably stepped on some toes and did some things that were considered gauche, but I just didn't realize that they were gauche at the time, because I was not as versed in internal law firm politics as I should have been.
Yeah. But I am really glad that you sort of spoke to the white elephant in the room there, because it is an issue, and I hope to see a shift. And again, it's one of the things that makes me so passionate about, practicing on purpose, and why I created programming around it is, politics is the antithesis. When you allow your firm to get caught up in politics and driven by politics, which I think is the old style way of operating, it is the antithesis to being able to truly practice on purpose. The two do not go together well. So thank you for speaking to that issue. So anything else you'd like to touch on? You've given us such great nuggets here today, Kevin. I've been taking little notes at the side as well, as you probably noticed. And anything else you'd like to expand on?
Oh, not really. I mean, you asked a lot of good questions. I think we covered a lot of material in the short time we were together. And I hope this was some help to you and your audience.
Absolutely. And for our listeners out there, I really recommend you go back and listen to this at least a couple of times, because there's all kinds of incredible little gems and tips that you could apply really simply that could really move the dial for you if you take the time to go back and catch them. So I do suggest you do that. And I always like to end, Kevin, not to put you on the spot, but what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to, not even about marketing. It can be just one of those moments when you had one of those ahas that was looking at something differently that shifted how you show up.
It was actually in 2019, shortly after I left the law firm. And it was one of those things where, again, politics was kind of involved. And even though I'd been there 15 years, there was a change in the top. And so some of us were asked to leave, and we had, we were in the C-suite, and we were asked to leave, and we were taken care of. And at first it was, a real blow.
Sure.
But then after I was away from there for about a month, I realized that what I do does not define me, in that I came to this piece where I don't have to be the chief marketing officer of any big organization anymore.
Yeah.
I can do other things. And once I realized that, my life just became so much nicer.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. And I think a great message for us as lawyers in particular as well, for our listeners out there, because I think so many lawyers are so tied to their identity as a lawyer that they end up ignoring other parts of their life that, as you said, even going out in the community, and that could enrich and enhance not only their personal life, but impact more positively on their professional life, so they can have a more purpose-driven life. So that was beautiful. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the gems today. It's been great to have you here, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I really invite our listeners, if you want to go check out more about Kevin, please do that. Check out his website at kevinlsullivan.com, and we will make sure to put that in the show notes for you. And I am sure you have all got loads of value from this. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done that, and share it with anyone that you think could get some value from this messaging. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, I invite you to go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose. Find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in the world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Take care.